Hey everybody, Jeff Rowan here. I'm back after a little hiatus. If you hear a little noise leaking into the audio today, it's because it's raining cats and dogs here in DC. But we won't let a little rain stop us. Today I'd like to talk about two events that took place on TV this week. First, Stephen Colbert's rant against Donald Trump. And second, Jim Comey's attempt to defend himself before the Senate Judiciary Committee this week. In the first instance, I think the public has gotten it very wrong about Stephen Colbert. And in the second instance, I think Jim Comey got it very wrong about himself. But let's start with Colbert. Now, to set this all up, it all began when John Dickerson of Face the Nation and CBS did an interview with Donald Trump this past week. Now, Dickerson is an incredibly civil, professional interviewer. Donald Trump is a somewhat erratic, unpredictable, chaotic interviewee. So at a certain point in the interview, sort of out of nowhere, Trump informed Dickerson that his show, Face the Nation, represented fake news, and that, in fact, Trump himself referred to the show as Deface the Nation. Dickerson, for his part, took it in stride, and the interview went on until a point where Trump became so frustrated by Dickerson's questions, particularly about whether he still believes that Barack Obama wiretapped him, that Trump cut off the interview, walked away from Dickerson, sat down at his desk in the Oval Office, and refused to participate in the interview any longer. So that's the backdrop. Colbert was obviously very irritated that Trump would treat such a nice guy as Dickerson in such a high-handed manner, made the point in his monologue and said, you know, Dickerson's a class act, but I'm no John Dickerson, and proceeded to begin to tell us what he would have said had he been in the place of John Dickerson. And that led to a slew of comedic insults, each one more biting and savage than the last. And it went something like this. Here's a little sample in case you haven't seen the monologue. Mr. President, you attract more skinheads than Rogaine. Mr. President, more people are marching against you than are marching against cancer. Mr. President, you talk like a sign language gorilla that's been hit in the head. So after those three barbs, Colbert offered his coup de grace and the line that has produced all the controversy. Mr. President, the only thing your mouth is good for is serving as Vladimir Putin's cock holster. Now, I should point out immediately that the TV viewing audience did not hear the word cock. Cock was bleeped. And so as I was watching it in real time, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, did he say dick, prick, cock? He obviously said something, but you're not exactly sure what it was in real time. Only after I looked it up online did I find out that that's what he said. Now, the interesting thing about this is that obviously, all right-wingers, all Trump lovers, all Colbert haters have jumped on this, not just as an overly crude takedown of the president, but they started an internet meme, the gist of which is that Colbert is being homophobic. And that's what I want to differ with today. The people that feel that this was a homophobic joke aren't getting the joke. The issue isn't that Colbert is calling Trump gay. This isn't somebody on a playground saying, hey, you, man, you're gay. That's not what it was about. Colbert is making the point that Trump is submissive, subservient, enabling, and supportive of a guy who's an autocrat, an enemy of the United States, and a potential war criminal. It's not that Trump is gay. It's that he is an enabler, and he chose this rather pungent image to show Trump's subservience to Vladimir Putin. So his point wasn't that there's something inherently wrong with two men having sex. His point was there's something wrong with the leader of the free world being subservient and submissive to a guy who just tried to hack into our election. That was his point. In other words, he could have used any number of metaphors. He could have called Trump the caddy of Vladimir Putin. He could have said he was his butler or his gardener. He could have done a Driving Miss Daisy theme and said that Trump was Vladimir Putin's chauffeur. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with being a chauffeur unless you're the president of the United States and you're chauffeuring a guy who's a war criminal. That's the problem. So the issue, it wasn't a gay joke. It was a joke about the relationship between Trump and Putin, with Trump being Putin's lapdog, as it were. And I might add, just parenthetically, that Trump proved Colbert's point once again in the very interview with Dickerson when he was asked about Russian hacking. Mr. President, what do you feel about it? Did the Russians hack into our election? Well, it could have been the Chinese. This is what Trump said. It could have been the Chinese. It could have been anybody. Again, he's carrying Vladimir Putin's water for him. Now, I hear what some of you are saying. Well, look, okay, even if it wasn't clearly homophobic, it was at least very crude, more crude than anybody should be saying about the President of the United States. Well, one person's crude is another person's hilarious. Richard Pryor, many people crude, over the top, overly risque, disrespectful. I thought he was one of the greatest comedians in history. So we can debate that. My point is that there wasn't any inherent homophobia in it. And finally, it wasn't homophobic, and it was on target. As is so often the case, the broad Twitter sphere has gotten it wrong. Move on to the next issue. Jim Comey's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, in which he defended himself and defended his into the electoral process 11 days before the voting began. Here was his point. His investigators had just found this trove of documents on Anthony Weiner's computer, Anthony Weiner being the husband of Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's assistant. So they knew that there were all these documents there, but they hadn't looked at them because they had only found them because they were pursuing another case against Weiner that had nothing to do with these documents. When Comey basically acknowledges they got very excited because one of the things that had been missing from the emails that they uncovered from Hillary Clinton were the first 3 months of her stay at the State Department. So they all of a sudden they got very excited and said, man, we've hit the mother lode. We found more Hillary emails. We've hit the Holy Grail. We found the lost ark. The problem with this was they hadn't even read the documents yet. They had no idea what they had. They had no idea whether they would be of any interest or have any evidentiary value in Hillary's case. So he was just, all this irrational exuberance got established at that point. And Comey then felt, well, geez, I better do something about this. I've got this treasure trove of documents. So the way he characterized it before the committee is, I had two options. I could either talk about what we had, or I could conceal what we had. Now here's the problem. Mr. Director of the FBI, you didn't have anything. You hadn't read the documents. You hadn't assessed the value of these documents. You had absolutely nothing. There was nothing to conceal. The only thing that you would be concealing is this imaginary construct in your own mind that maybe the documents will amount to something. There was no indication that they did. So he's talking about concealing something when there was nothing. It's one of the craziest rationales I've ever heard. He reminded the senators, I didn't release this information publicly. All I did was I sent a letter to Congress. Well, what's the point of sending a letter to Congress? Congress can't do that you're going to reopen the case. Doesn't think for Congress. The only possible motive for sending that information to Congress was that you knew that the minute Congress got it, it was going to leak out to the public. It was a way of undermining Hillary Clinton's campaign. Put yourself in my position. Would you have talked or would you have concealed? I wouldn't have done either of those things. What I would have done is I would have said, it's really important to get to the bottom of whether these documents mean anything. I'm going to dispatch everybody at my disposal to read them before I say anything to anybody. And we're going to get through them before the election. And if they turn out to be a big pile of nothing, we're not going to say a word. And if they do mean something, well, then maybe it would be appropriate for me to intervene at that point. That was the proper conduct. The other interesting thing about this is, as he did, he gave himself some serious skin in the game. Because if 80,000 votes had switched hands in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and Hillary Clinton had won the election, there's no doubt in my mind that Comey would have lost his job. He would have been, either Obama or Hillary would have fired Comey in a New York minute. And in fact, historians are going to call that one of the most outrageous actions by an attorney general in American history. Comey offers the self-serving line, I couldn't have lived with myself if I had concealed something. Remember that at that point he was fancying himself as one of the raiders of the Lost Ark who had found the lost treasure. He had found that down was a whole bunch of nothing. No legitimate rationale for him inserting himself into the election at that point. So Jim Comey didn't get it right, but the historians 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 200 years from now, they'll get it right. And Jim Comey will be one of the great villains of the American electoral history. I'm Jeff Rowan. Thanks for watching.